Oi oi, it's your boy, the hardest working man in MMA media. Certainly working a little bit harder than Tyson Fury. Jack Slack is the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday. Yesterday, I dropped a big Jack Slack breakdown, which is a name I'm going forward with because I'm terrible at naming my content, and people actually just Google Jack Slack and then the fight name. But I dropped a big breakdown on the Thompson versus Holland fight, which was a banger. Loved it. Happy to eat crow because I wasn't very excited about it. And we're going to talk about that more today, but if you want to read a slightly better, more articulate version of what I'm about to say with pictures and stuff, that's where to go. I'll drop the link in the description on YouTube, or you can go to my Twitter and it's the pinned post. But that's for the Patreon boys, so if you're not a Patreon boy, consider signing up because you get tons of cool shit. Right, that's a plug done. Let's talk about these fights. There were some good ones. I actually haven't watched the whole card yet. I got carried away doing this thing yesterday, which meant that I had to watch the main event twice because I don't normally like to. But so I skipped a couple of the decisions on the prelims. I'll talk about those on the Boycast for the Patreon boys later in the week. We've also got one stuff to touch. Renier de Ridder went up to heavyweight, got brutally starched. Joshua Pacquiao, Jared Brooks, all that stuff. And I might even have a moan about Tyson Fury versus Derek Chisora, because why not? But for today, we're going to talk about the good stuff that happened. So there were a couple of knockouts on the prelims, which I did manage to watch before starting this recording. But the main card was pretty good all round. The main event was obviously tremendous. Rafael dos Anjos refused to go quietly into that long good night. And even people like Nicolau, who is a boring-ass fighter the majority of the time, came out and put on a banger. So what should we start with? I think we'll start with the main event. Why bury the lead? Stephen Thompson versus Kevin Holland. I rounded out my post-fight breakdown by saying this might be the last great performance we get out of Stephen Thompson, because I thought we were done for great Stephen Thompson performances generally. He's been slowing down a lot. One of the things that has been a big tell for me is that if you watch his early fights in the UFC, his hands weren't as good. They weren't as sharp. He was throwing them very loopy and always like the backhand and then step forward and throw the backhand on the very karate-style punching. Now he can actually box. But the big tell for me was that his back hits the fence far too much nowadays. And you saw that especially against Burns and Bilal Muhammad. A lot of what has made him great at defending takedowns in the past is that he doesn't let people get close to he doesn't let people move him close to the fence. He keeps the distance beautifully with his opponents, and it just means that, like, if you watch Rory McDonald or Johnny Hendricks against him, they were never at all comfortable fighting him. And that just isn't there anymore. He just can't stay off the fence if guys want to put him there. And Kevin Holland got him to the fence several times in this fight. But I really liked what I saw here. There was a lot of... there was some really slick stuff, but there was also a lot of Wonderboy just gutting it out, which, you don't see a lot from him. I will say the fight made Kevin Holland look very limited, because my feeling coming into this fight was that they'd given... It was especially funny because Kevin Holland was going off about how the UFC has favourites and they'd done him dirty. You're getting a main event against a shorter, smaller, one-dimensional striker, offensively. He's not going to try and take you down. When your issue has been people wrestling you. And you're in the main event too. So, what more could you want, Kevin Holland? They're giving you one back for doing them a solid. But man, did he look limited in this one. He was talking about using his length and his jab and stuff. His jab was basically a non-factor for most of the fight. What really hurt him was getting drawn into like a 1970s karate competition. If you watch any of those like old black and white home recordings from the Long Beach tournament with Ed Parker and stuff, where the guys are just standing side on and then trying to sidekick each other, they'll scuttle up and then they'll not sidekick and then they'll scuttle back and the other guy will throw a sidekick, and it's all very weird looking. Large portions of this fight got into that dynamic, and then Thompson would step up the middle of Holland's kick and punch him in the nose. And while I was collecting examples for my article, I got over a dozen of Thompson drawing a kick from Holland and then stepping up the centre and hitting him. Now, Holland didn't get hurt on a lot of them because his height and his ability to roll with the punch really did trouble Thompson. And that's what was quite interesting about this fight. Stephen Thompson has been loving drawing people on to counter hooks in recent years. If you watch Vicente Luque or Jeff Neal or people like that, they'll throw punches at him and then they'll drop the punches. They'll fall short on the punches and their head will come forward and he'll hit him with a counter right hook. The old Anderson Silva stuff. Problem is, it's really hard to do that against taller people because their head doesn't drop down nicely in front of your shoulder. So he was always going to have this task of punching up to Kevin Holland. And what he did was he drew him into these little outside kicking contests, and then he'd step up the middle like Lyoto Machida. He'd intercept him with a stepping left straight up the centre and hammer him on the face. And it worked really, really well. It worked dozens of times in this fight. Kevin Holland, especially like Stephen Thompson would do a step up outside low kick with his lead leg. He'd just kick him in the leg. Not even in a really like hurting way, but just in an annoying way. And then Kevin Holland would immediately do the same back, and Wonderboy would just step up the middle and punch him in the face. It's amazing how many times that sequence played out in this fight. And other times, Stephen Thompson would throw the side kick and Kevin Holland would try and do a side kick. But Stephen Thompson's is a really cut down, short side kick motion that he's worked on timing really well. And Kevin Holland has always just thrown like run up side kicks. If you watch his fight with Jeff Neal, he's springing across the cage, throwing these big side kicks. There's side kicks and there's side kicks. And Stephen Thompson's is much slicker than Kevin Holland. So Kevin Holland's like picking up his lead leg, gliding in behind it, and Stephen Thompson's just punching him on the face. A lot of this fight, because Thompson got hit early, and he was struggling with the reach, like he'd land a punch, and Kevin Holland had hit him with a couple before he could get out. But he was struggling in the early going, and what made the difference in the first and second round was that Thompson would just bite down on his mouthpiece and flurry hands, running straights, and back Holland up. And the visual of Holland going back to the fence from where he was, he'd be pushing Thompson back to the fence. Thompson would run at him throwing punches, and Kevin Holland would back all the way across the 30-foot cage or whatever it is, all the way across the 30-foot cage into the other fence. And Thompson wouldn't really hit him very well because he's so long and he's leaning away and retreating. But it did good things for the judges, and it did good things for turning the fight around, keeping Holland off him. The real threat in this fight to Stephen Thompson was the collar tie elbow, where Kevin Holland grabs behind your head or neck and he throws his right elbow at you. Grabs you with his left hand, throws his right hand. Throws his right elbow. And every time Thompson threw punches, Holland couldn't hit him with a good counter, but he could grab his head. And then the elbow would come over immediately after. So you saw this, it was really something that Stephen Thompson had dialed in preparation for, because every time Holland's hand caught him, he'd catch the wrist or the elbow, duck under it, and duck the elbow as well. Sorry, he'd catch the elbow of the hand that was collar tying him, and duck under that, but he'd also duck the elbow strike that was coming from the other hand. And the other one that he used was the overtie. I wrote about this in the article. Go check it out for pictures. But when someone grabs a collar tie on you, so they grab you behind the head with their left hand, it's very tempting for you to grab them behind the head with your left hand, and then you both wail away with right uppercuts and right elbows. And the guy who was already hurt normally comes out of that worse. Stephen Thompson did a great thing where the overtie is where the opponent collar ties you with one hand. So Kevin Holland grabbed him with his left hand behind his neck, and Stephen Thompson took his right hand and went over Holland's left hand and grabbed behind Holland's head with his right hand. Which is it's a wrestling technique, but what it means is that you can then use your the space between your shoulder and your neck like you're holding an old phone, and you're curling the wire in your hand and laying on your bed, kicking your feet up behind you, talking to your girl pals. You hold their hand in place with your trap, your shoulder and your neck, and then you have your other hand free to block their punches or to hold their wrist. So you saw Thompson holding the overtie and then catching Holland's free hand, or just holding his left hand right up on his head so that when Holland elbowed, he was hitting the forearm, not Thompson's head. So that was really interesting to see the overtie work like that. And then he did, on offense, use the overtie, which I didn't touch on in the article. But when he backed Holland up onto the fence in the third and fourth round, he's stepping in, and Holland's trying to grab a hold of him behind the head to pull him in. And Thompson grabs an overtie over the top, turns his shoulder into Holland, and just pops both of Holland's hands off his head and comes back punching, which is something Fedor and Nick Diaz used to do. They'd if you grab them with a double collar tie, trying to tie clinch or whatever, if you grab them with a double collar tie to slow them down or to try and knee them, they would grab over the top of your double collar tie, an overtie, and they'd throw that shoulder in and pop your hands off their head. And Nick Diaz would come back with punches to the body. If you watch his fight with Paul Daly, he does that loads. So that was already good. The side kick to the body from Stephen Thompson, he throws it in the first time Holland comes in the first round, and it sends Thompson flying. And that's the thing about the D side. It's a very unaesthetic technique, because if guys are running in on you and you hit them with the D side, you end up bouncing off them and turning your back and having to do a big correction. If you go read the article, there's a couple of examples of Thompson having to do big pivots to get back to where he started. So it's a very short technique. It's that Bruce Lee idea of longest weapon, nearest target, straight line. But after landing, you end up doing this big correction anyway. So it's kind of a mixed bag. But I think about 10 of them went in. They showed the stats, and he'd kicked him in the body 10 times. I think one of them was a good round kick to the body. But everything else was side kicks to the body as Holland was stepping in. And Holland really slowed down. I think this might be the most active I've seen Thompson's sidekick in a fight. He throws them 1 or 2 times normally, but it was constant in this one. Which is interesting, because this is also the first time I've seen Thompson fight someone much bigger, much taller and longer. And I would have thought that, it's kind of like if someone's got a good jab, you go, well, wait until they fight someone taller and longer. And then sometimes they'll surprise you, and their jab will just be so good that it's not, oh, I'm jabbing because I've got the reach advantage. I'm jabbing because the jab's my weapon. I always think of Tommy Loughran, who I did a Advanced Striking 2.0 on. You can read that if you're a Patreon boy. But he went up from light heavyweight to fight Primo Carnera, who was gigantic. And Tommy Loughran's one weapon was the jab. He stood completely side on, and he didn't throw his right hand at all. But he jabbed up this guy who was 6'6", 300 pounds, and Tommy Loughran was 5'10", and gave up over 100 pounds on the scale. So there was a little bit of that with the sidekick. And if we're doing surface level boxing comparisons, this was a little bit Duran-esque for me. It was like Duran. I think Duran Barkley's probably the one that everyone thinks of, but Roberto Duran, you would be very confident that his days of actually being one of the best are probably over. He's on the way out now. But he was so good that he'd still surprise you quite regularly against younger, better guys, or younger, supposed to be better guys. And I got a little bit of that here. Holland was bigger, younger, more athletic, or certainly in his athletic prime, whereas Wonderboy isn't. And Wonderboy put it on him. 4th round was fun because it was almost entirely Holland backing onto the fence and Wonderboy opening up. And that's something you don't get to see that much of from Wonderboy, but it harkened back to the Woodley fights, where Woodley would stand on the fence and wait for Wonderboy to come to him. But Wonderboy's never been a great finisher in the sense of mopping up. All these fights, he hurts them at some point. He hurt Vicente Luque. He hurt Jeff Neal. He catches guys with good counters, and those do hurt people. But if you don't knock them out outright, you've then got to do the job of cleaning up. And where they were originally focused on their stuff, they wanted to punch you as much as they could, and that's leaving them open for you to counter. Now they're shelling up, and you've got issues, which is kind of what Thompson had in round 3 and round 4. Holland wasn't attacking him anymore, and he couldn't get him out of there. But it meant you got to see him switch to orthodox and wheel kick. You got to see him throw some punches to the body, which he hadn't been doing all fight. He used to do a really nice, whatever stance he was in, the backhand. So he was southpaw for this whole fight, most of this fight. So a left straight to the body. He used to do really nice straights to the body along the fence, which was especially important in the Woodley fights because Woodley stood along the fence so much. But he was really reluctant to step in and punch the body here, I suppose because he was constantly aware of the elbow. It was the one thing that Holland was throwing all the time. And he managed to get away largely scot-free aside from that bit of trouble in the first round. But that was the last knockdown. He went left straight, right hook to the body, and then he threw a left overhand because Holland's hands dropped. But the high kicks, setting up the middle kicks were fantastic. If you watched, in the first round, he showed what he was going to do for the rest of the fight, which was throw the left high kick, and then he threw a left body kick, but he did everything to sell the high kick. If you watch the slow-mo replay of the kick that landed in the 5th, the body kick that stooped Holland over, he looks up and he throws his chest up and he throws his head up and he throws his arms up and everything's going up until the kick turns over really low. And it's a really beautiful piece of misdirection. And he did that dozens of times. And then, punching off the wheel kick I mentioned in the article, really love that. When he misses a wheel kick, he puts that foot down and he immediately leaps in with a punch, which is a great way to stop it from becoming a liability. Because missing a wheel kick, you turn your back, the other guy runs in on you, he gets his chance. If you throw the wheel kick, there's going to be a second where he's covering up because you've just done a wheel kick at him. So if you jump in with the punch immediately after, that works really well. Did that a couple of times. And then there was a really nice one where he stepped in as if to spin. So he put his feet on a line and he turned his shoulders as if to spin. And then he threw a left high kick instead. In completely the opposite direction. And he hit Holland in the head. Didn't get his finish though. Didn't get his finish at all. It was actually really good corner work that stopped this fight. Very rare to see someone throwing the towel for their fighter in MMA. Honestly, yeah. I mean, it's partly because there is the chance of the crazy comeback and you lose half your purse if you throw the towel in. And it's partly because there is this weird douchebag attitude about like throwing in the towel in MMA. But it was good to see the corner throw the towel for this one. Especially as a kick had broken Holland's hand, or Holland had... I doubt Holland broke it on Thompson because he wasn't really landing that. Actually, he was landing a really nice right hook to the body when he got it, when he and Thompson both threw kicks at the same time, which it often ended up weird for Thompson because he'd throw out a side kick or a hook kick and Holland would kick his other leg out. Basically around it because Holland was so long and tall. But yeah, he was throwing these right hooks to the body coming out of kicking exchanges, and those were really nice. And you could see they bothered Thompson, but he only threw it about 4 times. Something I've always liked, hitting Thompson's body. Jorge Masvidal hit on that a little bit too late in their fight, but he was giving Thompson a lot of trouble kicking the legs and kicking the body. So yeah, great fight. I've waxed lyrical about it here, but go read the article. Really lovely stuff. Just seeing Wonderboy show off everything he does, or a lot of what he does. And it's been touted for Fight of the Year. Honestly, after round 2, it was just sort of arse-beating of the year. But Holland was game. Hung around for the 4 rounds. I suspect he'd have gone out and done the 5th round too if his corner hadn't said, no, there's no point, which is, good cornering. I think it also just highlights that Kevin Holland is... I mean, he's always been a bit of a meme fighter, but he really is like... There's a limit on what he can do without developing some new skills. Because he had every physical advantage in this fight, and physical advantages do mean a lot. Look how much Israel Adesanya struggled with the length of Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira is a world-class kickboxer in his own right, but people keep pointing out, like, when these strikers fight someone who's taller than them, they suddenly lose. And if Alex Pereira were 5 inches shorter, I'm sure he wouldn't have as great a time beating the shit out of people as he does. So overcoming or failing to use those kind of advantages is always a missed opportunity. That's not great. But anyway, other fights on this card. Dos Anjos versus Barbarena. Dos Anjos just being a well-rounded old man. I think they said he clocked 8 hours of octagon time now. And honestly, I could see him doing this for another 5 years. I don't think he's going to be super elite. He's always going to have like 2 wins and a loss because he can't climb the rankings that high, especially not a welterweight, because he just isn't really a welterweight. He's a lightweight who struggles with his weight cut. But I can see him just slotting in and taking fights like this for another 5 years. If he doesn't want to make another run at the title, if he just wants to have fights, he could do this forever. But a couple of wins will very quickly convince a fighter that they are going to make another run at the title. Just savvy old man stuff. Exactly what you expect from him. You don't expect him to do like dive on a takedown from way across the ring and complete it in dynamic fashion. What he did was he entered a single from quite high. He didn't drop to the floor or anything. He just entered a single, came up on the body lock, pushed Barbarena to the fence, hit a trip, got on top. And it was basically like Natan Schultz versus Jeremy Stevens on the PFL the other week. He says as if he watched that. But yeah, it was just top half guard. And when you're in the top of half guard, the guy on the bottom wants to get his knee shield back in, and he wants to stop you from hugging his head. So what he'll do is the opposite leg to the one he's got trapped, he'll reach across and get that opposite arm with both his hands and push away, and then he'll try and get his knee in front of you. Problem is when they reach across for the opposite arm, the top guy can drop his chest on the top arm and put them in danger of that arm triangle. which is exactly what Natan Schultz did about 4 times against Jeremy Stevens, and Rafael dos Anjos did it about 3 times to Brian Barbarena through this fight. So the first round is entirely spent with him just trying to complete this arm triangle, move into mount. Barbarena keep answering the phone, squirming, pushing his way back to half guard. And in the second round, he came out. Barbarena attempted to take him down along the fence. Dos Anjos pummeled to better position, and Barbarena backed off. And Dos Anjos kept a hold of him, was like, no, and turned him around onto the fence. And then attempted a takedown of his own, tripped him down. You saw that modern mount play / half guard play. Dos Anjos was trying to pin one wrist to the floor. Barbarena had to bring the other hand across to try and free that wrist. And when he brought that hand across, Dos Anjos slapped his chest down on top of the back of the arm, started putting him in a gift wrap, which is where you're holding the opponent's wrist behind their head. It's like if you tried to rear naked choke yourself and the opponent grabbed your hand around the back of your head and kept it there. The gift wrap is... it used to be quite rare to see it. Hickson was into it back in the day before anyone knew any jiu-jitsu. Then it disappeared for a long time. Kevin Holland did it to Edson Barboza. And then Gordon Ryan has really brought it back in recent years from the mount in jiu-jitsu because he pins one hand to the floor and then you have to do something about it. You have to bring the other hand in to get involved, and he smashes his chest down, grabs it around the back, threatens the arm triangle again. It all plays together. Arm triangle, gift wrap. Gift wrap takes you to the back. Gift wrap can take you into arm bars, but he went to the back in this one. You saw when he had the gift wrap, Brian Barbarena willingly turned belly down and let Dos Anjos have his back because he wasn't going to escape from in the gift wrap, and it's a position where you can get hit quite a lot very easily. Elbows from the gift wrap, nightmare. So Dos Anjos picks up the win, good for him. Brian Barbarena loses to an old man finally. He's been doing a great old man tour. I think he's only like 33, Barbarena, but he's fighting all these 40-year-olds because he's found like his sort of level. He accepts good fights, I think, for him. I think what he's doing is what Dos Anjos should be doing, because Dos Anjos can easily beat the Lawlers and the Matt Browns and so on of the world. He's a 38-year-old man. He doesn't need to be fighting like Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington. What else was on? Sergey Pavlovich versus Tai Tuivasa. On the Boycast, I said, maybe this answers some questions about Sergey Pavlovich, because he's got an 84-inch reach, and I don't really know if he can use it, because he's been smoking people very quickly, and a lot of the people he's been smoking have been bums, like, what's his name? Shamil. But I said he's got this 84-inch reach, and we don't know if he can like set it up as a barrier, if he can use his jab to hold people off, if he can use his feet to keep that distance. And then he came out and he threw wide swinging right hooks. Again, last time against Derek Lewis, he was like jab, massive swinging uppercut. He just swung hard for Tai Tuivasa. And guys are going, oh, he's a problem. He's a problem. And I'm going, yeah, he is, but not for the reasons that a lot of people are saying he's a problem. How do you deal with a guy with an 84-inch reach? Well, he's not using it. He's walking in until his arm is at like a right angle and he's swinging hooks. No, I mean, really impressive, because Tai Tuivasa's thing is banging with people, so really impressive that Pavlovich could do that. Sort of intriguing now how he matches up with someone like a Cyril Gahn or a Tom Aspinall when he gets back. Probably more pressing is someone like Curtis Blades, but that's for entirely different reasons. However, Blades is pretty good at using his jab. I think Blades would probably want to not take big risks in that fight. He'd probably just try and wrestle Pavlovich, especially with how Overeem just beat Pavlovich everywhere except the boxing. And never had to engage him in the boxing, just hand-trapped him and kicked him. Didn't even let him punch. The way that Overeem sunned Pavlovich, I've seen people being like, Pavlovich had the flu and this, that, and the other. Every fight comes with a caveat about how one guy or both guys are injured and ill. So Overeem just made him look like an amateur. And this was late-stage Overeem. It's probably Overeem's last great performance, with the exception of beating Bad Harry the other month or week. And then I think he tested positive. And you're like, why? Why are you testing? It's heavyweight kickboxing. Do you want heavyweight kickboxing to stay dead? It's very funny because it's the Dutch government have insisted that drug testing needs to be done. And you're going, no, I want a generation of 6'7" kickboxers, please. And I want them absolutely jacked. And I want them here, and I want them now. So yeah, banger fight, lasted less than a minute, but doesn't tell us an awful lot about things I wanted to learn about Pavlovich, or Tuivasa, because as we said on the Boycast, I had been hearing rumblings that Tuivasa, his medical suspension from the Garn fight, where he took a kicking. I mean, he got beat. It was body shots that did him the most damage, but he got wobbled with like head kicks and things in that. And obviously TKO'd, so he took a load of punishment while being TKO'd. But his medical suspension ended something like 3 weeks before this fight. And clearly he's been sparring and doing contact training before that. So I was, it's kind of like the Marlon Moraes thing. I was going, if you can, and you've just done a main event in the heavyweight division, so you should have lots of money. If you can, you should take the time off to just recover. But he jumped into this quick, and, obviously Pavlovich is a hellacious hitter, but that's true of everyone in this division now. So you always wonder, like, was it worth jumping in so quickly again? How much does that affect you? Never like hearing about guys booking fights a week after their medical suspension ends. Because you're going, are you planning to not spar? Or are you going to be sparring through that entire non-contact time? But again, that's only what I heard. But it was 3 months ago, that fight. So if he was doing 90 days non-contact, that would be on the end of the suspension. Dolidze versus Hermansson, people were very hype about this. The grappling was cool, but the striking was a bit of a mess. Dolidze, aside from his great kicks, never been that impressed with his hands. I mean, he smoked Phil Hawes in his last fight, but Phil Hawes was on one leg and completely vulnerable. Dolidze's hands aren't great, which is why I used to liken him to a middleweight Paul Craig because of the way he looks and the way that he throws lots of kicks. But he wasn't kicking in this one because Jack Hermansson was trying to, showed him the takedown twice. And it just meant that he had this awkward following Hermansson around on the feet. He looked a bit like Chris Curtis. But then when Hermansson took him down, he did a great job of putting his feet on the hips from guard and elbowing, which would encourage Hermansson to bury his head and push in, and then that would bring Hermansson's hips off his heels, which meant that Dolidze could allow his legs to go around Hermansson and dig his arm underneath the leg, create the anchor, start throwing up arm bars, going to K-guard, all those options that we talk about quite a lot. If you get an arm under the leg, you can start attacking. I mean, Danaher calls it the high cross, when you bring your hips up perpendicular to the opponents, and you have your hips up in the air, and you're looking for that arm bar. They pull their arm out, you go to the triangle. This is all the Oliveira stuff. They stand up, you go to the leg in the K-guard, which is what he did, attacking the calf slicer from there, coming up on the back. And the calf slicer worked really well. He just, Hermansson got caught out of position or in a bad position and didn't adjust. He just let Dolidze come up behind him. And then once you're belly down and you don't have a leg to base on, you're a bit stuck. So it was one of those positions, kind of like the mounted crucifix, when you can't move and the other guy's hitting you, you might not be in danger of like being brutally knocked out, but in the technical sense of intelligently defending yourself, you're done. And Dolidze was wailing away. If he'd stayed there for 5 minutes, he'd have killed him. But it was one of those stoppages where it's like, they're telling Jack Hermansson you need to move, and he's going, I know, I'm conscious, and I do want to move, but I can't. He's on my leg. Tons of cool K-guard stuff in that fight. The striking was very bad. Hermansson has worked out that jogging around to the lead side of the southpaw is, it's kryptonite for a lot of these guys. He did it to Curtis, and Curtis was being super salty about this because he was in Dolidze's corner, and he's tweeting like, I told you I'd get you back, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, you still let this guy run from you for 5 rounds. Or 3 rounds, or whatever it was. So yeah, wasn't super impressed by the striking. Hermansson's takedowns looked nice in this one because he had his confidence, and that seems to make a huge difference. And then Dolidze's guard work looked brilliant. Again, it was the same stuff against Phil Hawes. Anchor under the leg with the bicep, or put the crook of your elbow behind the crook of their knee. Use that to pull your head round. Start inverting on legs. Start throwing up arm bars. Very powerful position. Very big in jiu-jitsu at the moment too. It's one of those really nice ones where it is extremely useful for jiu-jitsu and MMA. However, there was an example on the undercard, Yasmin Uruguay versus Estela Nunes. Once again, I'm going to say Yasmin Uruguay has pulled off something genius, because by coming in through Combate Global, she's on a 25-25 contract. She didn't have to fight for 10-10, while Jack Della Maddalena has just done his third fight in the UFC, so I hope he's finished his 10-10 contract. But they're talking about Paddy Pimblett earning like 25-25, and he's co-main eventing things. He's bringing eyes to the UFC. He's probably the best value they've ever got out of a fighter. The most value they've ever stolen from a fighter. But Uruguay, yes, she knocked down Estela Nunes, and then Nunes dug under the leg to start going up for arm bars and throwing, entry on the legs and stuff. And Uruguay didn't stand up. She got her butt off her heels, and there's a name for it. It's a type of squat you can do where you're on your knees and then you just come up to straight back, hamstrings down through knees to the floor. That upright kneel. So she raised her hips and postured up, and what happened was that Nunes's legs just popped past her. So she ended up in sort of a mounted crucifix on the side, because if the opponent's arm is still under your leg and you pop their legs past you, you're just sitting on top of their arm. So that was quite interesting to see. That whole K-guard system can go a bit wrong if the guy throws your legs by and you don't invert on his legs. What else was interesting? Eric Anders versus Carl Dorcas. Eric Anders is an interesting one. Actually, we were talking about the most value stolen from a fighter. Eric Anders had they keep telling you how he won or was part of a winning team for a college football championship. And you're going, wow, you must love the UFC, because if you're going from never having been paid for destroying your body to being paid a little for destroying your body, you're doing very well. It's kind of like why all the wrestlers are the biggest bootlickers, because they do one of the hardest sports in the world, and they have no expectation of getting paid for it. You win an Olympic gold, and you get to coach a team of children. Like, that's your prize. You get a highly sought after coaching position, which isn't far removed from being a PE teacher. I mean, respectable job, but like, imagine world champions in football being PE teachers, and at your local school, you could just walk up to them and ask them for tips. Here's your football coach, Mr. Messi. But yes, Anders versus Dorcas. Dorcas was landing well with the right hook in the early going, throwing 1-2 and then pulling away with the right hook. Hands looked crisper, but Anders just got in his face, which is what you wanted from Anders originally. Going all the way back to when he ended up headlining an event against Machida in like 2015, maybe. I was begging him to just get in Machida's face and throw punches, because he has this thing where you can drop on a single and he can push the guy to the fence, but if you mix that in with level changes and coming up punching, you'd have something there going. But he'd only throw the left straight and drop on the single. Never throw the right hand, never do anything else, never ever kick. If you watched his kicks in this fight, absolute garbage. He throws his kicks like he's trying not to kick. He starts throwing it and then he holds his hip back, slaps the guy with the inside of his leg. It's kind of like watching Kayla Harrison's kicks the other day. But it was interesting. He pursued Dorcas. Dorcas entered and they sort of clinched up, and as Dorcas came away, he hit him with a knee and a couple of punches and knocked him down. And Dorcas never really got his wherewithal back after that. It looked like, I don't know, he had the face injury, so maybe it re-injured the face, but he might have just been stunned. I thought his grappling looked good in his surviving grappling. He was using the De La Riva guard and throwing up kicks and things, and grabbing onto singles and pulling Anders in so that he couldn't keep punching. Anytime he kicked Anders out to range on the feet, Anders would stand there for ages, not trying to throw low kicks and not really doing anything. And then Dorcas would get a good rest, and then the referee would say stand up. Unfortunately, Anders did keep pressing in face first and hit him with a couple of punches again, knocked him down and finished him on the ground. Happy for Anders, because he's had a very boring, grindy career, and I've always thought that he could do better than what he does with just a few tools. And I think this is kind of confirmation of that, just by having a rough and tumble fight. He entered the clinch and came out swinging, and then he kept coming in behind his head and swinging. Against a much slicker striker, he still got it done because he's a big, powerful guy. It's kind of like, who's that guy whose dad is always screaming in his corner? Ion Kujalaba knocked his teeth down his throat. Devin Clark, that's the one. Hugely athletic guy, can deadlift like 900 pounds, can throw hook kicks as a light heavyweight, but then only throws one hook kick around and does fuck all else. You got all this athletic potential and you're fighting in a really dumb way. Anything else worth touching on? And I think the last fight we'll do today is Philip Rowe versus Nico Price. Whoa, this was some of the gassest shit I've ever seen. And I've seen Kimbo Slice versus Houston Alexander and Kimbo Slice versus Dada 5000. These fellas were puffing. But that was round 3, so I think I'll allow that. But I mean, Nico Price, coming back from an ACL tear apparently, wearing double knee sleeves, good shout. We always like that, because then you're not telling the opponent which leg you had blown out. Wearing one knee sleeve or taping one leg up heavily is so Well, I mean, you're trusting in your opponent to be like gentlemanly, and they have no reason to be. So he's wearing the double knee sleeves. Such a strangely built individual. You know, the really, really wide shoulders and long arms. On what it looks like they've taken the shoulders and arms of a much taller man and put them on Nico Price. But Philip Rowe, very long and gangly for the weight class. Great right hand, good jab, and that's about it, to be honest. But Nico Price looked like he'd been planning to do the Dan Henderson strat minus the overhand, because he was doing step up inside low kicks, and I was watching this fight going, that is landing constantly. And it's moving Rowe around too. It's not like he's just ignoring it because it's not doing anything. It's knocking him out of his stance. It's stopping him from circling off. It's stopping him from countering. And I'm going, I don't know if he checked or blocked a single one of those. And I went to Fight Metric, and according to Fight Metric, you know, grain of salt, it is a guy with a keyboard just punching keys as the fight happens. And he did block me on Twitter, so he might be a dickhead. But on Fight Metric, not only did Philip Rowe not check a single kick, Nico Price didn't miss a single kick. He threw 28 kicks and landed every single one to the legs. Fucking hell, Philip Rowe. Just give the next opponent a free primer strategy guide on how to beat you. So Nico Price actually kept him under pressure pretty well, and his corner rightly said, when you're throwing, he's not throwing. It's not like he's countering you when you're throwing. It's when you stop throwing that he's countering. So Nico Price threw something like 200 strikes to Philip Rowe's 100 or 90 or something like that. Problem was that he got very tired doing it, knocks Philip Rowe down in the third round, goes hell for leather trying to finish him, because Nico Price has always been a great finisher, as in like big highlight reel finishes. Maybe not the most methodical in putting people away, before people come back at me about the Stephen Thompson discussion about what is a good finisher. Unfortunately, Philip Rowe survived because Nico Price got caught up trying to darce him from half guard, and Rowe had the underhook. And of course, if you're very, very long and tall, the underhook's pretty stuck in there. It's very hard, because you've got to get that underhook across you if you want to darce effectively, especially against a long guy. So that sort of saved him, and then he got back to his feet. Price was knackered, and then he just timed a good right hand and finished him off. Rowe, that is. Timed a good right hand and finished him off. So, yeah, this is the thing. I quite like Rowe. I like what he showed against his last opponent. He's got a great right hand. He's got that long man Tommy Hearns right hand that comes from a day's march but comes straight. He's got good timing. His grappling was decent. I really liked the ninja choke he attempted when Price sort of rested his head on him. If you come in low for a single, especially the guy's tall, if you duck your head down when you're attempting a single or a double along the fence, the guy can just snap up the ninja choke and you know, threaten to finish you. Ninja choke, front naked choke, whatever you want to call it, power guillotine. The guillotine where you use a rear naked choke grip, figure fouring your arms. But the complete disregard for low kicks when they were giving him trouble, not great. I mean, you could say they're not hurting you, but if Nico Price had been following with overhands effectively, he could have given him hell. You can just watch Alexander Volkanovski. Look how much stock he puts into the inside low kick. Has he ever finished or hurt anyone with inside low kicks? No. But he uses them so much that he can build off them effectively. And if guys ignore them, he starts building into overhands. If guys notice them, he starts faking them and using their checks. Rowe was really helped by the fact that Price didn't build off this. Didn't see too many outside low kicks. If Price had been throwing the calf kick, Rowe would have had to do something about it. But yeah, I mean, excited for Rowe's next one. Nico Price, I think he needs to fall back into the old man welterweight division that we have going on here. Maybe Price versus Barbarena. I feel like they probably fought 3 times or none at all. Let's have a look. They have not fought. There we go. Easy matchup. As in easy to put together, not easy for one fighter or the other. So I'll talk about the rest of the fights on the Boycast. If you want to read the article / get that Boycast, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Getting ready to catch up on D1 Mark Jacasey with the knee straps. Bless.